What does it mean to be good to you?
I guess the first word that comes to mind when I contemplate good is pure. You can be contaminated with a bunch of bad thoughts and temptations and impulses, and sometimes being good is having the strength to turn away from those temptations.
Welcome to Chasing Good, a circle group podcast with the aim to help us better understand the good that's happening in the world today. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome back to Chasing Good. Here with me today, I have Nicole Gibson. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Michael, it's my pleasure.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, for those of us who haven't met or heard of Nicole before, Nicole is quite the legend in the space. She's
great intro.
Has been doing it for quite some time, and having started Love Out Loud, previously Rogue and Rogue Foundation, and making some very significant impact with the younger generation in the mental health space locally, and then she's taken the mission global, which is just incredible to see. So, Nick, could we start by hearing a little bit about your background? What give us a bit of context as to what's gotten you to where you are today, to be in this incredible position that you are?
What a question. I mean, where do we begin? Like formative years, business.
Absolutely. If keen to hear formative years into business journey, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, of course. I think one thing that was really notable about my formative years, I guess, was there was a lot of transition and change, and I think now that I look back, I really do think that was a kind of a petri dish of perfection for an entrepreneur, because I developed a pretty high appetite for risk. I think a real fluidity in how I could deal and adapt with change. And when I think about the context of tackling any kind of social cause, and beyond that, actually becoming an entrepreneur and riding the highs and lows of the startup journey. I mean, now I'm building a Silicon Valley tech company, so I think that's kind of like at the extreme end of the entrepreneurial journey. I think there was a lot about what I went through when I was younger that kind of primed me for that. Matched with was always very different thinker. I think definitely I never really saw 1 + 1 = 2. I was always kind of out of the box, and I had to really learn to love myself in that. And I think that's true for many people that experienced feeling different, feeling like an observer. That was definitely and still is in many ways, my experience kind of socially. I'm fascinated by people and human behavior. But definitely, when I watch kind of people that are in groups where there's really present groupthink, I feel like I was never really a part of that clique. I was always on the outer, kind of observing and asking questions, and all of those things I think have been massive assets actually in my entrepreneurial journey ultimately, because I guess if you're observing what otherwise people are experiencing as normal, then you have a vantage point to come up with solutions that other people don't necessarily. And that's a big part of the message I like to get through to people that are on some kind of major mission or life purpose journey. You got to embrace the natural competitive edge you have, which is the difference in how you view the world. I think all of that accumulated to me wanting to start that journey super young. Like I started the Rogue and Rogue Foundation, which you were just alluding to. I started that when I was 18, and that was a mental health charity that tackled mental health through community-based interventions, which kind of people hear that now and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I like to kind of remind people to rewind their minds kind of 12 to 15 years ago. No one was talking about community-based mental health. Like it was considered a really kind of left field, almost wacky idea that we could tackle mental illness through building communities and creating a sense of belonging and purpose. These were like two completely unrelated ideas, which seems crazy, but that was definitely the thought process. And it's been really quite amazing to see how peer support, community-based intervention, community-based awareness in the conversation of mental health has become, I think, one of the most mainstream conversations that people have in health. And I feel very kind of blessed to have been on the beginning of that wave and kind of guiding the conversation in that direction. That was a very amazing journey, and it was very grassroots in the beginning. Like we were traveling, my then team and I were traveling to very remote rural communities and kind of facilitating these conversations. You can only imagine in those environments with a huge amount of pushback and resistance to kind of watch the conversation blossom. And I think with the tech we're developing now, I was actually just writing about this earlier today on LinkedIn. I feel like we're on a new precipice, and an even more exciting one in many ways, of understanding emotional health and what emotion really is. And it's not yet a conversation that people are tackling, but kind of mark my words that I think this is a conversation that will explode in the next couple of years. And again, I feel like I'm kind of uniquely positioned to be on the edge of that, which is really exciting.
Absolutely, 100% it is. And it's interesting that you say, I suppose, from your own experience, having been, I guess, growing up and having potentially even been kind of sitting on the outskirts, thinking a little bit differently, but also within that context, identifying that the need for community is so important, whilst not necessarily being in the community itself, kind of observing that from the outset. Did you have good support networks in that capacity when you kicked that off? How did you go about that? Because it's an interesting kind of
paradox.
Connection there.
Yeah. Well, I think again, like I think we can be very one-dimensional in our thinking, and we think the person that has always experienced a sense of belonging would be best placed to find a solution for those that haven't. But actually, I really believe the opposite is true. And this is why my message to visionaries and entrepreneurs and, social advocates or whatever kind of wherever you are on that spectrum, I really believe that your deficit is your ultimate competitive edge, because you understand, you can deeply empathize. Like when I think about what makes an incredible product, what creates an incredible service, the design of that, it's someone that can deeply empathize with the problem you're trying to solve. And so for me, definitely feeling like there was a lack of that throughout my life. That actually, I believe, was the reason I was able to so effectively create it for people, because I was questioning why things were they were. And I was kind of engineering it from a place of objective observation. And it's interesting because it wasn't that, I was never unpopular. I had community around me, but I think what I struggled with was the way in which people connected just never felt present enough or kind of raw enough, real enough. And that made me ask a bunch of questions, even from a very young age. Like, why are we so resistant to just being authentic? Like, why do we struggle so much to just say what we think? Why are we so bound by all of these kind of social niceties and constant rule making rather than expressing who we really are and seeing who can meet us in that? Because to me, that, they're the people I've always wanted around me. I haven't wanted people around me where I'm constantly needing to adapt who I am to maintain those relationships. I feel like I have a strong enough relationship with myself that sort of comes first, and then every other person I accumulate along the way who loves me is kind of, the cherry on top. And I saw that most social dynamics in Western society are based on the opposite. I'm going to try to understand what is socially acceptable and liked, and what's going to make me popular and what's going to make me impressive and successful and beautiful, whatever the marker is. And I'm going to do that, even if it's not who I really am, to find that sense of belonging. And I guess what I saw in people was a really deep kind of void. And actually, I think beyond that, quite a lot of heartbreak. I think a lot of people have broken hearts in our world. because they aren't being themselves enough to really know what it feels like to be loved for who they are. And I think that becomes like a really vicious, self-fulfilling prophecy that so many people live within. And I mean, I speak a lot about the struggles I went through subsequently as a teenager. I battled with an eating disorder from 14, 15 through to 18. So those very kind of formative years of my adolescence, and just noticing the way that people were so afraid to have that conversation. It's like people would do anything to not address that detail. And in reality, like, I was still there, like the real me was still there. That was something that I was struggling with. That was a set of behaviors that, you definitely needed healing. But the fact that it was so all-consuming and distracting for people that I experienced many times where people were no longer able to humanize me in that. It really gave me quite deep insight into the level of fear we have when it comes to emotional discomfort and the subsequent impact that has on our ability to create true bonds with one another in our world.
It's very interesting that you were able to, objectively observe these feelings and then take those lessons from that. And from a personal journey, as you mentioned, you didn't have Rogan Rogue or Love Out Loud to lean on there. Yeah. How did you go about kind of the identification process, the self-healing, the actualizing of, self-love? How did you do that on your own?
It's a really interesting question. I wish I could sort of say these are the 7 steps, like I did this, then I did this, then I did this. But I think, the journey of self-awareness first has to start with a willingness and a commitment. I think, and even more so, a acceptance that the journey is going to be non-linear. And because I had this deep understanding, that if I was struggling with this, other people most likely were too. And because, when I was unwell, it was quite physical. So I think this was a really interesting part of what I went through, because, someone struggling with depression or anxiety, other forms of mental health challenges, it's not always as visible. So, it's hidden and you don't always see people's reaction. Whereas what I went through was very visible. And so I could see people's discomfort, almost immediately when they would talk to me. I think one of the key questions I learned to ask in that was, well, if I in this state brings up this much discomfort in the people around me, what other major challenges are we not addressing as a result of not being able to feel comfortable having difficult conversations or humanizing challenging emotions, or embracing challenging parts of the human experience? Because this kind of obsession with happiness is not realistic. It's not life. Life has this beautiful, intricate design of, the amazing times that you want to live, 100 times over and replay, as well as the despair and the grief, whether that's, getting heartbroken for the first time, or losing someone you love, a project not working out. And I think it's equally as important to embrace that, because that is the human experience. And so that was a really sort of important question that I asked that was transpersonal. It wasn't just about me and what I didn't get, but more broadly, I was looking at my experience of people just wanting to talk about anything but the thing that needed to be talked about. I started to question the other ways in which that was affecting our world. And I think that made me feel so deeply inspired to chase good, to want to affect change in that way. And I think, the way I went about that isn't going to be the right way for maybe someone listening to this. What I did was buy a van and started to travel to what ended up being 300 communities around Australia, creating spaces and workshops for people to have these challenging conversations. I mean, that was a pretty radical action to take as an 19-year-old. That might not be everyone's path. And I think that's important, because we're all going to be called towards a different expression of doing good in the world. But I think the similarity of the starting point is, the willingness to go on that journey. And I think the deeper part of that is more about letting go of how you think life should be, letting go of, the expectations and the pressures. Because of course I had that, like, you need to stay in uni and you need to do this path and this is what it looks like. And, you can always do good later on. And all of these reasons to delay what was really in my heart to do. I guess I'd had a unique experience where I already felt outcast enough that, the kind of the coercion of social acceptance was no longer really interesting enough to manipulate me into staying in a life that I didn't want to live. I had sort of come to terms with the fact that I was a bit of a rogue, I was a bit of a maverick, and I was way better off just embracing that and seeing where that led. And the irony in it is what I went through, in those formative years of my entrepreneurial journey, the level of risk I took, how uncomfortable it was. And it was really uncomfortable often, living in the middle of the desert in a van. Like, it was often uncomfortable. And I'm so grateful that I did that then, because being a teenager was the perfect time to do that. Doing it as a 30-year-old would be way more difficult. I'm sure if the why was big enough, I would embrace it and do what I had to do. But it was the right time for me to be tackling that. And so much of the advice that was thrown at me was, wait till you're, 40, 50, and then do the thing you really want to do. But tick all the right boxes first. And like, it was the worst advice. I'm so glad I trusted myself to just go all in and follow my heart, because that continued to open doors that have led to a very non-linear but very amazing life. I think I've had an incredible life so far, and I could honestly say that if tomorrow was my last day, don't think that's going to happen, and God forbid, but I can honestly say that I've lived the fullest. In the years that I've had on the planet, there's so much more I want to do, but I've taken every major risk I feel that I've ever been kind of invited into by life. And that was ultimately one of the most healing parts of my mental health journey, because I think learning to trust yourself is a big part of recovery of any kind. Learning that your instincts, what's in your heart to pursue, has purpose and a meaning, and you have intrinsic value as a human being in this world to affect change. That's some of the most healing, confidence building places to arrive at. And I think it's important, but there's only so much seeing in a therapist's office can do in that conversation. I think that's a part of it. And also, like, living life, in the way that you dream and being brave enough to take those actions, that really can be the best therapy for people.
There's a few pieces to kind of cover off in that. One in particular, which I find very interesting, is just the depth and level of empathy that you must have held for everyone else to create that why. You've obviously gone through the hurt, but then to translate that into such a strong and empathetic, this is a problem that I can help other people with, admirable is the word that comes to mind initially, but I would suggest it doesn't do it justice, particularly at such a young age, kind of taking those risks, as you say. And I would suggest we don't have enough time to kind of dive in, because I'd love to hear more about that story and kind of traveling around Australia and going to those communities. But on the piece of empathy, have you always kind of been naturally inclined towards empathy, or has that been something that you've practiced and taught yourself along the way with this mission that you've created?
Let me just say that this is a very insightful observation, you know, because I hear kind of the question in that of what really catalyzes that level of collective perspective in someone. That's kind of how I hear that question, because I guess my experience of what you're pointing to, this part of me, which is probably one of the most defining parts, I would say, of who I am, that it's not even wants to, it does take on a level of responsibility that's so far beyond just me as an individual. I really believe it's more to do with a level of awareness and a level of consciousness, rather than, you know, we have to kind of work at becoming more empathetic. My kind of perspective is the more you, I don't know if evolve or is the right word, or maybe grow as a human being, I think it's a natural place you'll find yourself. And I think that's a really hard kind of concept for people to grasp, because I think we see a lot of people in positions of power that, from my perspective, are actually not, they haven't grown. You know, they're using that, they're exercising that power for selfish intent. They're exercising that power in a way that evokes control and fear in the world. And I think part of the ultimate compassion we can hold is to look at someone that is, you know, that their impact is anchored in a position of power, and that power isn't affecting ultimately good in the world. To have enough compassion in our hearts to look at that and actually realize, wow, there's a wound, or probably a series of wounds in that individual that haven't been addressed or reconciled. They've inherited power, and I think that's a massive conversation. I mean, I just published a book on power. Like, that's how fascinated I am by the concept, because I think true power is coming to a place of true self-security, you know, but societal power is inheriting wealth, inheriting status, inheriting a title that opens doors, you know, and the fact that we relate to that idea as power, I think, is very counterproductive, because anyone that's needing to take power from others is not truly empowered. They're not really a powerful person. A powerful person is someone that has transcended the need to take really anything other than what they need, similar to nature. Nature is the most powerful force that we have. So all that being said, it's a very long-winded way of answering your question. I believe that the journey I went through was so painful that it forced me to evolve. Like, it was sort of evolve or die. And part of that evolution was naturally being anchored in more of a collective awareness. It wouldn't be fulfilling for me, and not from a perspective of, I really like to help people, like that's a part of it, but it's more than that. It's like the natural way I see the world is not dualistic, you know, it's not there's you and there's me and I have to practice empathy towards you. It's more a sense of like, we're one, you know, and if you're hurting on some level, that's affecting me. And then when you look at that on a global scale, the amount of people that are hurting, that are suffering, that are rejected, shut down, repressed, not able to express themselves, not able to be who they really are, afraid, you know, to live a life that's really aligned to their integrity. This is a problem I think all of us should get more interested in, because I can only be as free as the freedom I perceive in the world, right? It's kind of one and the same. So yeah, there's a deep empathy there, but it's also kind of naturally the perspective I bring to life.
That is beautiful and very excellently put, really incredibly put. There's been a few pieces that you've kind of, community has been a kind of a core piece, obviously, kind of building communities and giving people or individuals the space to feel connected to other individuals. And you reference society as a whole, but I feel as though there is that gap between, society and community per se, and that you're bridging that in many ways, and you're endeavoring to do that at a kind of local level and then now at scale too. Can we talk to a little bit more about the what you're doing with InTruth, and what how you've taken this idea and you're applying it to a global movement, or maybe how you have taken it global in the first place, and now how you're scaling it. If we could talk to that would be wonderful.
For sure, yeah. There's a lot in that. So I think, the first way that I want to break this question down is, what are the layers that influence our sense of being in the world? And obviously the first is individual, the second is family, the third is community, and then the direct community around us, and then society at large, and collective humanity, basically. And all of these feed in to one another. And what I've found in working with people in a really deep way is, often when you strip it back to their individual sovereignty, very few people can coherently and articulately say, this is what I believe, this is what I value, this is who I am, this is what I want to do. It's so influenced, and it makes sense that it is, but it's so influenced by the expectation of family, the expectation from those closest to them in their community, the expectation and the values that we have come up with as a society, and then, the world at large. And, my time, I was the federal commissioner for 3 terms, as well as growing this nonprofit, right? So that was a really interesting time where I was I was participating in change, at a really high level, a kind of a political and societal level down. And then I was also working with people on that really kind of localized level, and just seeing the disconnect, and also understanding that at the end of the day, all of these systems and all of the funding that's going into this kind of systematic and systemic change won't actually change until the individual changes, until the individual starts to evolve and grow. And when I started to really see that and believe that on a really deep level, like, policy can be there, but it doesn't necessarily change the way you, Michael, act tomorrow. If you have a deep pain in you, or you were raised in some way to be to view humanity in a segregated way, and to be judgmental, just because there's a human rights law that passes, it doesn't necessarily change the way that you show up and treat people day to day. So it's some change, and it's an important layer of change, but to me it's not true transformational change. And it relies on a system of enforcement. And I want a world that we no longer need to use force and punishment, as a means to have people be, good human beings. I'd much prefer a world where we feel intrinsically inspired to evolve towards what I believe we are, which is compassionate and loving creatures. Ultimately, we only act away from that when we feel under threat. And when you study the brain and our physiology, that's very true. And so in that, I uncovered that, the way I wanted to affect real scalable change in the world was to support the individual to intrinsically shift. And I noticed in that it's one of the most complex, nuanced, and most avoided forms of change. To create solutions that are designed to intrinsically inspire someone to change. Government doesn't want to borrow it. Agencies often don't want to borrow it, and it's because it's complex, and the systems we've had in place that really reach into that level have often been religious, and prior to that, philosophical. And I think we're moving into a world where that's becoming more and more rejected. But what's in its place? And so that really uncovered the layer of change that I wanted to tackle. And so the question became, on an individual level, all of the change that I want to see happen in the world, what does that ultimately come down to in the individual? And, in my language, I would say helping someone move from fear-based decision-making to love-based decision-making in a more kind of linear explanation, and how I communicate about InTruth, the tech company we're building, is to help people really build an emotional capacity to have these more inclusive, loving perspectives and actions. Because the reason we move into this state of fear, where we are segregated, we see ourselves as basically separate from others around us, we dehumanize someone on the other side of the world if they're in war because we don't feel anything, because we don't perceive that we're connected to them in any way. It's kind of not our problem. These are all mechanisms of defense and protection that essentially, once that's worked through and someone has developed enough of a resilience, basically, in a capacity to stay in a loving state and broaden the parameters in which that love can be extended. So to kind of explain this, your sort of average person is fine to extend love to their romantic partner, is fine to extend love to their immediate family, and that's probably it. Maybe some close friends. So, let's go beyond that. Can we build enough internal capacity and love to expand that to our community, to expand that to society, to expand that to humanity at large? And we can't just ask people to do that. It's actually it's similar to running a marathon. You can't go and run a marathon tomorrow if you've never run before. It's slowly but surely building that fitness over time. And I think the way we relate to our emotions is actually similar, because for someone that has never even thought to extend love beyond just maybe their immediate family, it can actually feel overwhelming and exhausting, right? I can't love the world. It's hard enough just loving this person next to me most of the time. How am I meant to have a heart big enough to love the world? Well, we need a tool that's actually training us to do that. And it was really that thinking that drove the design of InTruth. What if we could actually understand our emotions, see our emotion more objectively, see the patterns that govern our life, our emotional patterns, and what category of life they're being affected in? Would that actually have the capacity to change our level of awareness, intentionality, and consciousness towards our emotional selves? And really, 85% of our decision making is emotional, right? So we can only force ourselves to do so much before we need to dig that layer deeper and actually truly transform our emotional state, which I see as kind of unanimous with our frequency. If you're vibrating, right, in an emotion of anger or sadness or anxiety, jealousy, day in, day out, that's really going to affect your ability to be that more altruistic person. But if you can understand where these blocks are and work towards a more centered state of equanimity, or maybe have more acceptance for the full spectrum of your emotional experience, so that there's more fluidity, you're not stuck in these same emotional patterns all the time, I believe that could create one of the biggest catalysts for change we've ever seen in the world.
I completely agree. The concept of and please correct me if I oversimplify this in a incorrect way, but it sounds like it's a personalized toolkit to build emotional intelligence and self-awareness around your own emotional well-being, which can then help bridge the gap between individuals and community, and that's the centerpiece for everything. Is that right?
Right, exactly. So when you are tracking things with data, so the way that we build the tech is basically it's a machine learning model that plugs into heart rate variability that translates the emotion. So I won't get too technical because that's a whole conversation in itself, but basically this is real-time tracking over the day, the week, the month, months, years. So you can look at that data to any different level of granularity. You can look at it, you can look at the emotional patterns that govern your relationship with your work over the course of 6 months, for instance. Then on a collective level, you can start to zoom out again. This is the power of data, and start to see when say a big political decision is made, how has that actually affected different subsets of our society and our community? And even more importantly, I wouldn't introduce this on every podcast, but I think you guys are a good one to go there. Imagine you had enough users that there was some kind of decision that was made politically or globally that had a lot of power to affect harm on the planet. So say it was like a nuclear war, but we had enough users on InTruth to send a notification to and say, hey, would you calibrate to the emotion of peace right now, intentionally, and to actually be able to use non-invasive tools to shift, the probability on an energetic level of something like that even being able to happen on the planet. What we're really asking people to start to wake up to is our internal state affects the external world. And that's one of the biggest paradigm shifts I believe that we need to go through and that we will go through in the coming years.
The evolution to which we have seen society awaken, you might say, over the past, I would imagine that you have witnessed it at a significantly greater level than me. So perhaps for you over the last 10 years, but for me specifically, I've kind of seen and felt it more over the past 5. Gain acceleration, if anything, in the movement of consciousness and self-awareness and spirituality. And it's been interesting as well how that shift has happened, potentially throughout the decrease of populism of kind of of religious enterprises per se, particularly within the Western world. So that how that's played together. What you have come to though is talking about, I guess I go back to design because I'm looking at this from a business perspective of how you've found this ultimate problem. What's the biggest problem you see in the future, which is fucking huge. You have, excuse my French, but you have absolutely, you've reverse engineered this inconceivably large problem and individualized it to help build a solution. And
15 years of thinking, just
15 years of thinking. Yeah, I can imagine. So that's that. But was there a process that you've followed to create these solutions surely is there a framework that you follow to come problem solution, or have you just followed has it been a flow of energy that you've just kind of followed here? That's an incredible, and also might I say incredibly bold and quite inspiring to see, to tackle global issues at such a openly, honestly, with love, is a very again, admirable, doesn't do it justice, but very a lot of people are happy to solve individual problems. Your root cause, let's fix it. So yeah, anyway, pardon me, I go back to, is there a framework that you follow or that you have followed to try and find these solutions? Because you're a problem solver by definition.
Again, such an interesting question. Yeah, I think, it is true that not every person is a systems thinker, and some of us are. Some of us have, and like I said, at the beginning of the interview, there was that divergence always. There was that tendency to, I love a challenge, so I want to go to the biggest. It feels not satisfying to tackle a subset of a problem. Maybe that's a good way to put it. Like, there's this, like, intense impulse in me to want to get to the real core of what's causing problems that are actually more like symptoms of a deeper root cause. So that's very ingrained in who I am. And I think, other people that are also tackling major problems, like you see this in Elon Musk, like he's just completely obsessed with wanting to get to the core. And I think that's a disposition. I think some people have that. And a lot of people don't realize that it's also a curse, because you're basically solving problems all the time. It'd be great to have a break from solving problems sometimes, but there's a beautiful upside to it as well. Okay, so your question, it's kind of, there's multiple facets to your question, because yes, in building the tech, we're following certain frameworks that you would to build a technology, like, jobs to be done, design frameworks, but it's so much more than that, because it's really what I've spoken through over the past 30 minutes is really the level of evolution someone can go through that allows them to take on responsibility for humanity at large. That's a process I had to go through to be able to kind of calibrate at a level where I'm like, yeah, I can be responsible for that. I can be the receiver of resources, which is responsibility and pressure and a commitment to execute and timelines and all of those things. I'm the condition to be able to do that. So that's a journey in that. I think second to that, it was a very natural progression of discovery, because I didn't start with an answer, I started with a hypothesis. I believe that what I experienced, other people are experiencing. This feeling of emotional resistance, this desire to want to connect more deeply, and having that be central to feeling more whole and to heal. And then I went out into the world and I started to test that hypothesis. So, in tech, we would call it like a proof of concept. The tech that is now InTruth, the proof of concept was sitting in a remote community in the middle of the desert with 4 other people and having a conversation. So it was it was worlds away. The proof of concept to the V3 that I'm working on now was worlds apart. But I always focused on the problem I wanted to solve, and the best way that I had to solve it as an 18-year-old was that. And then, that started to evolve a step further, and the government was like, hey, these solutions are actually working. Can you take some of that thinking and apply it to a federal level? And I was like, all right, cool. I'm solving the same problem, but I'm solving it not just from a local level anymore. I'm solving it from the level of a nation, so a societal level. And then through that experience, I was like, well, if it's worked at this level and it's worked at this level, maybe it can work for the world, but how would that look? Because I need to be able to come up with a way of reaching the world. And I kind of think that the only 2 ways to really reach the world at that scale is music and technology. And I would love to pursue music one day, by the way, so that's not off the table. But my decision at that time was let's tackle technology and let's apply this deep insight into the problem that I knew existed, and think about how we could design a technical solution. And I've got to say, a lot of people thought that this was so outlandish. I was a non-technical founder, I had no tech experience. Looking back, it was a crazy pivot. Not really a pivot, but an evolution. It looks like a pivot. But honestly, in my reality at the time, it seemed like the logical next step.
And hindsight would suggest that you were absolutely correct. So what year did you start InTruth? What year did this kick off? Do you mind me asking?
I started to put it out there as an idea at the end of 2020.
Yeah, okay.
And then it was really, like, it had a momentum. I started talking about it. I was in a couple of masterminds. So I was sharing the idea, and then within days I was invited to Necker Island, and I thought she was going to say, like, you know, in a few months, and she was like, next week. And so, you know, the decision to go to Necker Island also meant that I couldn't return to Australia because of the lockdown regulations at that time. So I was like, you know, do or die. Like, I take this jump and I see if I can go and raise the capital and make it work. And I really jumped in the deep end. And when you do that, you know, I think a lot of people frame these stories as like, I took the leap of faith, and then, you know, 3 years later I have this great tech company and it was a breeze. But no, it was fucking hard. You know, it was really hard. And there were so many small challenges, you know, day-to-day challenges, and there still are, and there will be, you know, a few years to come. But I have been pretty unwavering in the decision I made. And I think that is that's what it takes. And I think, you know, in order to endure those challenges, there's got to be, I think there's some core beliefs I hold that maybe make that easier for me. And one of them is, when we make a decision, and that the caveat there is a decision that is made in integrity and true alignment. You know, we're not forcing ourselves to be someone we're not. We're not trying to cut corners. Like, the caveat there is, it has to be a decision that really comes from a truly good moral place and is aligned to who you really are. And I think if that's present, my belief is any challenges and resistance and friction that you come up against is a perfect part of the design that's conditioning you to become the person capable of executing that mission in the world. And that allowed me and allows me to have this really tenacious amount of faith.
The centerpiece of love that you stem from is quite apparent. And, you know, talking to so Love Out Loud, and then the way that you empathize with other individuals, the way that you make these decisions, and even putting in the quality controls for the decisions, ensuring that, you know, they're coming from a place of alignment with self, with morals. And I love the fact that you've highlighted the alignment piece there too, referencing that, you know, not everyone's coming from the same place.
Intent's really important, right? And I think like anyone listening to that, if you're experiencing a huge amount of resistance, I want you to ask, like, is this the resistance that's trying to grow me to become a person that's got a level of integrity that can really handle the execution of my mission? Or is the resistance actually the natural kind of default of life, which is loving, consistently mirroring the fact that I'm not coming from a place, you know, that really should be rewarded by life. They're two, and it's nuanced, right? But I think it's important. I think a lot of people that talk about manifesting your dreams don't really talk about integrity as one of the key pillars. And I actually hear a lot of messaging around the fact that, you know, well, the universe is impartial. It's just gonna, you know, whether you're evil or you're good, it will work the same. But I mean, maybe some people experience life like that. That's definitely not how I experience life. I believe that people that are in a state of truth and integrity and moral good are ultimately going to have more strength and reap far greater rewards, even if it takes longer, than someone that's coercive or manipulative, or, you know, coming from a place that is deceptive in some way.
And so beautifully led. Thank you for doing my job for me there. Moral good. the concept of good as a whole. We, as you know, the podcast is called Chasing Good. And so what we are trying to unpack and uncover is what it means to be good in a modern day. And we know that there's a constantly evolving and shifting perspective. There's polarizing opinions and contexts to lean from. And, the integrity piece, I think is as you've alluded to, being central there. But what does it mean to be good to you?
Good, broadly. I guess the first word that comes to mind when I contemplate good is pure. But I don't think it's kind of mutually exclusive, because I think, you can be contaminated with a bunch of bad thoughts and temptations and impulses. We all have that. I've definitely struggled a lot with that in my life. And sometimes being good is having the strength to turn away from those temptations. But I think in its purest form, good is innocence. But that's very hard to maintain throughout our lives.
Oh, I love that answer. Okay, fantastic. And so if we're talking then with regards to the evolution of innocence per se, and how that can be adjusted and manipulated, and it can grow throughout time with different experiences, would you require an awareness of innocence to maintain that good? Because innocence, I hear innocence and I often think, my first thought when I hear innocence would be naive, yeah. Is that aligned there too?
Well,
or do you think you can both be innocent
the purest,
but aware? Yeah. It's the most broken. I like how you go to the crux of things, don't you? It's amazing.
But but this is why morality is so important, because I think it is inevitable. Some people will lose their innocence because of really challenging, life circumstances as a child. Some people they're exposed to too much, and some people have, profoundly maintained their innocence until, I don't know, 30 or beyond. But I do think a part of the design of life will, take that naive innocence away from you at some point, unless you live in cotton wool. But here's the trade, right? Here's the trade. You trade in life innocence for wisdom. And so at every juncture, your innocence, if you want to be good, if we're looking at this from the concept of the construct of good, if you want to stay good, I think the trade-off to your innocence has to be that wisdom. I'm no longer naive. I see life for what it is. I see the harshness of reality. I see the truth that some people lie and cheat and steal, and not everyone has good intention. And I see the darkness in me. And I'm going to now employ wisdom to keep me good in place of that innocence.
Mate, that is incredible. How good. Okay.
Yeah.
Why love?
Well, why not love? It's the best.
It is, but it's been core, hasn't it? What was the...
Yeah.
Was there a realization? Where did that come from?
Yeah. I think love can be a really loaded term for people. And when I talk about love and my concept of love, I think it might be important to kind of stipulate that I don't mean necessarily a romantic love or like a Hollywood love. It's more a state of being. It's it's a place in you that is, I think the characteristics of it can be described as inclusive, creative, expansive, accepting, compassionate, solution oriented. Like these are this is love's expression. And all of us, I believe, have this as our default mode. And what takes us away from that is when we are scared, and we have defenses because we've been hurt before. We're not able to trust ourselves or people around us. It's these layers of defense that end up taking us away from that place, and understandably so. But I really believe that our truest expression will ultimately lead to this sense of liberation, right? Like when we feel most free and most liberated in a true sense. I don't want these kind of concepts to be taken the wrong way, because I'm sure a lot of people have experienced total freedom, taking shitloads of substances on a dance floor. So you've really got to ask, like, is that true freedom? Is that true sustained freedom? Can you access that of your own volition, or are you dependent on something? But when you really find that place of true freedom and sovereignty within, I honestly believe that our default is to be loving, because we have no reason to not be loving anymore. And that intelligence, true intelligence, will evolve towards compassion, because compassion always yields better outcomes. So it's not really heart versus head at a certain level of evolution. I think at a certain level of evolution, intelligence and love actually are one and the same.
Which also ties in beautifully to the evolution of good and wisdom and innocence as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I truly have so many more questions. I'm particularly and I recognize we are coming up to time now. So if I can ask one more question, and this is just a personal for you as someone who has been on such an incredible journey, and I imagine and I'm not talking about just kind of where you've been and what you've done, the personal journey, as you were alluding to earlier, you are in the right space and the right place, and you are the right person to do this, and the energy allows you to be that. How does that feel?
How does that feel? I mean, on a good day, it feels neutral. Because I think if I have too much charge, then I'm not really there, And sometimes that happens. I think that's a part of the journey sometimes too, that, the inertia of like, wow, this is where I found myself. That's fear, and that's normal, and we all have insecurities. But yeah, I guess, I've experienced so much, I guess. Like, I've heard so many people's stories. It's been the biggest blessing of my work to hear people's deepest shame, deepest regret, the things that they've been consumed by in guilt, all of the things that we most don't want to experience as a human being, grief, all the way through to the most beautiful parts of the human experience. And I too have had to face off with serious shadows in me. I think however much light you have an equal amount of darkness. I've had major demons. And I think it was about me getting to a place where I no longer tried to cut these parts of myself off. It was no longer a narrative of like, well, in order to be the leader I want to be, I have to abolish, all of that. And it was actually more about becoming whole, embracing the fact that these are parts of me, and I might never get rid of them, but by loving them and embracing them, I have more control over them. You know, they're not going to come out of nowhere and make me act in erratic ways anymore. That I see that those parts of me for what they are. And, you know, slowly but surely, and by no means am I there, but I'm a lot more there than I was 10 years ago, I would hope. You know, they don't have as much control over me anymore. And yeah, I think when you really arrive at that place, it feels quite neutral.
That was not the answer I was expecting. And I'm so glad that you shone a light on that, which also highlights the incredible journey that you've been on. And it also is evidence to the fact that you're also actively pursuing the change you want to see in the world within yourself as well, which is incredible. Nicole, I can't thank you enough for your time and for sharing your story and for sharing your wisdom today. I can't thank you enough for what you have done for the individuals, the communities, the societies, as you continue on your journey. I wish you all of the greatest of success, and I truly believe what you are doing is incredible and needs success. It will get there. I have no doubt, and I'm very excited to watch that success happen. And so, please continue doing what you're doing for the world. Everyone is grateful, and we see you. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I've loved it. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to Chasing Good, a Circle Group podcast. Our mission is to shift the world closer to kindness, sustainability, awareness, and action. We hope you enjoyed. Until next time.